Every evening, just as the last ribbon of sunlight slipped behind the dark wall of ancient pines, the forest awakened in a way no one could explain. The wind always fell silent first. The birds stopped singing. Even the restless branches seemed to hold perfectly still, as though the woods themselves were waiting for something older than memory. Then they came. One by one. 7 enormous white wolves emerged from the fading shadows without making a sound. Their coats glowed softly beneath the rising moon, brighter than fresh snow beneath winter stars. Their golden eyes reflected no hunger, no anger, no fear. They crossed the meadow with calm, measured steps until they surrounded a small stone cottage resting alone at the edge of the kingdom. They never scratched at the door. They never howled. They never hunted nearby. They simply stood through the long hours of darkness, facing every direction like silent guardians until dawn painted the sky silver once again. And then they disappeared. Not a single footprint remained behind. For 20 long years, the same strange ritual unfolded every night. The people of the Northern Kingdom stopped asking why. Children were warned never to wander near the cottage after sunset. Travelers hurried past before darkness reached the hills. Hunters refused to enter the surrounding forest once evening arrived. Old women whispered prayers whenever the wolves' names were spoken. Some believed the cottage was cursed. Others believed an ancient spirit slept beneath its foundations. The soldiers insisted the wolves were waiting for the return of their true master, the Alpha King. Yet there remained one question that no storyteller, scholar, or priest had ever answered. Why would the Alpha King's legendary wolves guard the home of an ordinary young woman who had never even seen the royal castle? Only the forest knew. And the forest had kept its secrets for far too long. Spring always arrived late in the Northern Kingdom. Even after the snow disappeared from the valleys, patches of white still clung stubbornly to the mountain peaks, feeding crystal streams that wound through endless forests of pine and cedar. Morning mist drifted lazily across the hills, carrying the scent of damp earth, fresh moss, and blooming wildflowers. It was a peaceful land, beautiful enough to make strangers forget the hardships of winter. Far from crowded villages and busy market roads stood a weathered stone cottage. Time had softened its walls with climbing ivy. Its wooden roof leaned slightly beneath years of snowstorms. Blue smoke curled gently from its chimney each morning, disappearing into the cool mountain air. This lonely little home belonged to Rowan. She had lived there for as long as she could remember. No one knew exactly how old she was. No one remembered seeing her arrive. The oldest villagers simply said she had always been there, growing quietly alongside the forest itself. Every sunrise found Rowan already awake. She opened the cottage windows before the birds welcomed the day, allowing cool mountain air to sweep through the tiny rooms. The smell of drying herbs hanging from the ceiling mixed with fresh bread baking inside the clay oven. Bundles of lavender, sage, mint, and wild rosemary decorated every wooden beam, filling the cottage with the comforting scent of home. Outside, the morning dew sparkled across the garden. Medicinal flowers bloomed beside neat rows of vegetables. Tiny rabbits often waited patiently beside the fence, knowing Rowan would scatter handfuls of fresh greens before beginning her work. She smiled every single time. Not because anyone was watching, but because kindness had become as natural to her as breathing. One quiet morning, she noticed a robin lying beneath an old apple tree. One tiny wing hung awkwardly against the grass. The little bird fluttered helplessly each time it tried to fly. Rowan knelt slowly. There now. Her voice was barely louder than the breeze. You've had enough fighting for one day. The robin didn't struggle. It simply watched her with bright black eyes while she carefully wrapped its broken wing with soft linen torn from one of her own sleeves. She carried it inside, placing it beside the warm fireplace where gentle heat filled the room. Moments like these shaped her days. An injured fox. A frightened deer tangled in thorn bushes. An exhausted traveler suffering from frostbite. A hungry child whose family had lost their harvest. Rowan never asked who deserved help. If someone suffered, she helped. Word quietly spread across the kingdom. People began leaving small gifts outside her gate. A basket of apples. Fresh goat's milk. Handmade candles. Sometimes nothing more than a single flower picked by grateful children. She accepted every gift with the same gentle smile. By afternoon, the forest usually became alive with sounds. Woodpeckers hammered against towering trunks. Streams laughed over smooth stones. The distant cry of hawks echoed across open skies. Yet there was one sound Rowan never heard. The howl of the 7 white wolves. During daylight, they were nothing more than legends. No hunter ever found their dens. No shepherd ever saw them crossing distant hills. It was almost as though daylight erased them completely. Only when darkness arrived did they return. Every evening followed the same quiet rhythm. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, Rowan lit the lantern hanging beside her front door. Not because she feared the night. It had simply become part of her routine. She watered the last flowers, closed the wooden shutters, placed another log upon the fire. Then she sat beside the window with a cup of herbal tea, waiting. Outside, shadows stretched longer across the meadow. Silence slowly covered the forest. The first wolf always appeared from the western trees. Massive, graceful. Its thick white fur shimmered beneath moonlight like untouched snow. A second emerged moments later. Then a third. Soon all 7 stood around the cottage, each facing a different direction. Perfectly still. Like living statues carved from winter itself. Rowan had stopped counting the years since she first noticed them. She never attempted to approach them. She never tested the invisible circle they formed. For reasons she couldn't explain, she respected the silent boundary. And somehow, the wolves respected hers. Not once had they stepped into her garden. Not once had they frightened the animals living near her home. Even frightened rabbits continued nibbling clover only a few steps away. The wolves ignored them completely. Sometimes Rowan wondered whether they truly watched over the cottage, or watched over her. One evening, curiosity almost overcame caution. She walked toward the doorway carrying a wooden bowl filled with fresh water. The largest wolf turned its head. Its golden eyes met hers. Neither moved. The cool night breeze stirred Rowan's loose chestnut hair while moonlight reflected across the wolf's calm face. Slowly, very slowly, the great animal lowered its head. Not in surrender. Not in warning. Almost. In acknowledgement. Rowan quietly placed the bowl near the edge of the garden before stepping back inside. By sunrise, the bowl remained untouched. She smiled softly. "They're not here because they need me." The mystery only grew deeper. Weeks turned into months. Seasons continued their endless dance. Summer painted the hills bright green. Autumn covered the forest in gold and crimson leaves. Winter wrapped every branch in silver frost. Still, every single night, 7 white wolves stood around the lonely cottage. The villagers never grew comfortable with the sight. Whenever merchants traveled between northern towns, they hurried past Rowan's home before sunset. If bad weather delayed them, they chose to sleep beneath broken wagons rather than knock upon her door after dark. One afternoon, Rowan carried herbs into the nearby village. Children stopped playing the moment she arrived. Some smiled shyly. Others hid behind their mothers. The adults greeted her politely enough. Yet their eyes always drifted toward the distant forest. Toward the place where the wolves would soon appear. An old baker finally gathered enough courage to speak. "Child." He handed her a warm loaf wrapped in cloth. "Have they ever spoken to you?" Rowan laughed gently. "They're wolves. You know what I mean." She nodded. "I've never heard a single sound from them." The old man's weathered face somehow looked even more troubled. "That worries me more." On her walk home, those words lingered inside her thoughts. Why would silence frighten people more than growls? Perhaps because silence left room for imagination. And imagination often created monsters where none existed. That evening, grey clouds rolled across the mountains long before sunset. The air smelled different. Sharper. Colder. Snowflakes began falling unusually early, swirling wildly beneath growing winds. The forest seemed restless. Branches creaked. Owls abandoned their usual perches. Even Rowan's little Robin, now fully healed, refused to leave the windowsill. As darkness settled across the valley, Rowan instinctively looked toward the western trees. The first wolf emerged. Then another. Then another. She counted automatically. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Her smile faded. She waited. Surely the last one was simply delayed. Minutes stretched painfully. The wind grew louder. Snow covered the meadow. Still, no seventh wolf came. The 6 remaining guardians stood frozen in their usual places, but something had changed. Their ears remained sharply raised. Their noses pointed toward the northern forest. Their muscles tightened beneath their snowy coats. For the first time Rowan had ever seen, they looked afraid. Far beyond the trees, somewhere deep within the darkness, a long, distant sound rolled through the frozen mountains. Not a howl. Not thunder. Something older. Something that made every wolf lift its head toward the unseen wilderness. Rowan felt the warmth leave her hands as she stared into the endless forest. Without understanding why, she knew. Somewhere beyond those ancient pines, the missing wolf needed her. Sleep never came that night. Rowan lay awake beneath a thick wool blanket while the fire crackled softly inside the stone fireplace. Every few moments another gust of icy wind rattled the shutters, and the lonely sound seemed to echo through the empty cottage. Outside, the 6 wolves had not moved. They remained fixed in their silent circle, yet their attention never rested on the little house they had guarded for so many years. Every pair of golden eyes remained locked upon the northern forest, where darkness stretched between the ancient pines like an endless sea. Something was wrong. Even the air seemed to know it. The familiar chorus of crickets had disappeared. No owl called from the trees. Not even the whisper of running water reached the cottage. The forest had fallen into a silence so complete that Rowan could hear the slow beating of her own heart. She rose before dawn. The fire had burned low, leaving only glowing embers beneath pale grey ash. Pulling a heavy cloak over her shoulders, she opened the front door. Cold air rushed inside. Snowflakes drifted lazily across the meadow. The 6 wolves stood exactly where they had been the evening before. None of them looked toward her. None acknowledged her presence. It was as though every instinct they possessed pointed toward the unseen danger hidden somewhere beyond the northern hills. Rowan stepped into the snow. The cold bit through her boots almost immediately. She looked toward the wolves. "You've never come here without all 7. Her voice disappeared into the morning mist. "I don't know what's happened." She hesitated. "But I can't ignore it anymore." For the first time in 20 years, one of the wolves moved before sunrise. The largest among them slowly turned. Its enormous paws left deep prints in the fresh snow as it approached Rowan. Every story she had ever heard warned that standing this close to one of the Alpha King's wolves meant certain death. Yet no fear rose inside her. Only sadness. The wolf stopped only a few feet away. Its golden eyes searched hers quietly. Then it turned toward the northern forest. It took 3 slow steps. Stopped. Looked back. The message needed no words. "Follow." Rowan swallowed. Every sensible thought urged her to return inside. No one entered those woods willingly. Hunters who wandered too deeply often returned days later with frightened eyes and stories they refused to finish. Some never returned at all. Yet another thought settled gently inside her heart. If an injured animal had come to her door asking for help, would she refuse simply because the path was dangerous? She already knew the answer. Returning to the cottage, Rowan gathered only what she truly needed. A leather satchel, clean linen, dried herbs, a small knife for cutting roots, a water skin, her old lantern. Nothing more. She paused only once. Looking around the tiny cottage, she smiled faintly. "I'll be home before sunset." The words sounded comforting, even if she wasn't certain they were true. When she stepped outside again, the 6 wolves had vanished. Only one remained. The great white leader waited patiently beside the edge of the forest. Without another glance backward, Rowan followed. The deeper they traveled, the older the forest became. The young pines surrounding her cottage slowly gave way to towering giants whose trunks were so wide that 5 grown men could not have wrapped their arms around them. Their branches hid most of the morning light. Snow rested thick upon every limb. Occasionally it slipped free with a soft sigh, falling silently onto the earth below. The air smelled different here. Not simply of pine. There was stone, ancient moss, cold streams hidden beneath layers of ice. Something timeless. The wolf never hurried. It moved with quiet confidence, weaving between roots and fallen logs while Rowan struggled to keep pace. Several times she nearly slipped on frozen stones. Each time the wolf stopped. Waited. Only when she caught up did it continue. Hours passed. The familiar paths disappeared. Soon Rowan realized she had crossed far beyond anywhere she had ever gathered herbs. The forest no longer felt empty. She couldn't explain it. She simply felt watched. Not with malice. With curiosity. From somewhere high above, a raven glided silently between snow-covered branches. A red fox emerged briefly from behind a fallen cedar before vanishing without making a sound. Far away, deer stood upon a ridge, staring toward Rowan instead of fleeing. Every creature seemed aware that something important was unfolding. Near midday, the wolf stopped beside a narrow stream frozen beneath clear blue ice. It lowered its head, sniffed the ground, then growled. It was the first sound Rowan had ever heard from one of the 7 wolves. Low, deep, filled not with anger, but concern. She knelt beside the snow. There, pressed deeply into the frozen earth. Boot prints. Human. Several of them. Fresh. The edges remained sharp despite the falling snow. Whoever had passed through had done so only hours before. Rowan touched one print carefully. The snow around it carried faint reddish stains. Blood. Not much. But enough. She looked toward the wolf. It wasn't yours. The wolf met her eyes briefly, then continued north. Now Rowan noticed other signs. Broken branches. Freshly cut vines. A snapped arrow shaft buried beneath the snow. Someone had hunted here. Someone carrying weapons unlike the simple bows used by village hunters. Clouds gathered overhead as afternoon faded. Snow began falling harder. The wind rose steadily, carrying long mournful whistles through the towering trees. The trail climbed into rocky hills where ancient stone pillars leaned beneath blankets of moss. Many had cracked with age. Others stood surprisingly untouched. Each carried strange carvings. Circles. Stars. Running wolves. Hands raised toward the moon. Rowan brushed snow away from one weathered carving. A woman. 7 wolves surrounding her. Above them, a crescent-shaped symbol. For some reason, seeing it made warmth spread briefly across her chest. Before she could study it further, the wolf bolted forward. Not running wildly. Purposefully. Rowan hurried after it. The trees opened suddenly. She found herself standing before the ruins of an ancient temple half buried beneath centuries of snow and stone. Massive columns had collapsed across the courtyard. Broken statues rested beneath vines frozen solid by winter. Whatever place this had once been, time had nearly erased it. Then she heard it. A weak breath. Barely louder than the wind. Her lantern trembled as she crossed the ruined courtyard. The wolf waiting beside her suddenly let out another low call. Not loud. Not fierce. A call filled with urgency. Hidden beneath a shattered archway lay the 7th wolf. His enormous body was trapped beneath a slab of broken stone. Dark crimson stained the white fur along his shoulder. An iron spear pierced completely through one side of his body before disappearing beneath the fallen rock. His breathing came slowly. Painfully. Each breath sent small clouds into the freezing air. Rowan's heart tightened. Oh! She rushed forward without thinking. The wounded wolf lifted his head. Golden eyes met hers. Not wild. Not threatening. Only exhausted. She dropped beside him. Her hands trembled slightly as she examined the wound. The spear was unlike anything forged by village blacksmiths. Its dark metal seemed almost black beneath the snow. Tiny symbols had been carved along its shaft. The edges shimmered with an oily green stain. Poison. She had seen enough sick animals to recognize it immediately. If the spear remained, the wolf would die. If she pulled it free too quickly, he might bleed to death. She closed her eyes briefly. Think. Slowly. Calmly. The fallen stone had to be moved first. She pushed against it with all her strength. Nothing. The slab barely shifted. She tried again. Pain shot through her shoulders. Still nothing. Her boots slipped against the snow. She fell to one knee, breathing hard. The other 6 wolves appeared silently around the ruins. One by one they pressed their shoulders beneath the edge of the stone. Together, human and wolves. They pushed. The ancient slab groaned. Snow cascaded from its surface. Another shove. It lifted. Only enough. But enough. The wounded wolf dragged himself free before collapsing onto the snow once more. Rowan immediately broke the spear near its center. Holding the wound firmly, she whispered soft reassurances, though she knew the wolf could not understand the words. Or perhaps, somehow, he did. With one careful motion she drew the broken spear from his shoulder. Dark blood spilled across the snow. Quickly she packed the wound with crushed healing herbs before wrapping long strips of linen tightly around the injured shoulder. The wolf never snapped. Never growled. He simply endured. His breathing slowly steadied. Minutes passed. Then something changed. The air around the ruined temple grew strangely warm. The wounded wolf struggled onto trembling legs. He looked at Rowan for a long moment. Very slowly, he lowered his great head, until his forehead rested gently against the palm of her hand. The instant their skin touched, brilliant silver light burst between them. Rowan gasped. A warmth unlike anything she had ever known rushed through her arm. Not burning. Not painful. Gentle. Ancient. Alive. A delicate crescent-shaped mark appeared upon the inside of her wrist. The same symbol she had seen carved upon the weathered stone only moments before. The wolves all stepped back simultaneously. Not in fear. In reverence. Far beyond the mountains. Across forests, rivers, villages, and frozen valleys. The great bells of the royal castle began to ring. Once. Twice. Again. Their deep voices rolled across the kingdom like distant thunder. In the capital, servants froze where they stood. Soldiers looked toward the highest tower. Old nobles turned pale. Because those bells had remained silent for many years. They rang only for one reason. The Alpha King had awakened. The sound of the castle bells traveled farther than any rider could. Their deep voices rolled across frozen rivers, echoed between towering cliffs, drifted through sleeping villages, and reached the farthest shepherd tending his flock beneath the northern mountains. Every man, woman, and child who heard them stopped whatever they were doing. The bells had not spoken in years. For most of the kingdom, they had become nothing more than silent giants hanging high above the royal city. But the oldest people remembered. Those bells rang only when something happened that could change the fate of the kingdom. And this time, they would not stop. Far away, beyond miles of forest and stone, the royal capital stood beneath a grey winter sky. Its high walls climbed from the mountainside like part of the cliffs themselves. Towering banners bearing the silver wolf crest fluttered against the wind. Soldiers hurried through the courtyards. Servants whispered nervously beneath stone archways. The ringing bells unsettled everyone. No one knew why they had awakened. Except one man. Deep beneath the oldest tower of the castle lay a chamber untouched by sunlight. Ancient candles flickered beside carved pillars older than the kingdom itself. At the center of the chamber stood a throne fashioned from white stone streaked with silver veins. Before it rested a broad sword whose blade had never known rust. Its owner had not touched it in many years. A tall figure slowly opened his eyes. The room remained perfectly still. Even the candle flames seemed reluctant to move. The Alpha King rose from the throne with calm, measured grace. Long silver hair rested across the shoulders of a dark cloak lined with white wolf fur. A thin scar crossed one side of his face, fading into a neatly trimmed beard that spoke of long years rather than old age. His eyes held the same golden color carried by the 7 wolves. Power rested within them. Not loud. Not proud. Quiet. Heavy. The kind born through unbearable loss. He stepped toward a narrow window overlooking the snow-covered kingdom. For a long moment he simply watched the distant mountains. Then his hand tightened slightly around the edge of the stone. It has returned. His voice barely rose above a whisper. An elderly advisor standing nearby lowered his head. The bells answered before any messenger arrived. They always do. The king closed his eyes. The guardian mark has awakened. A shadow crossed the old man's face. After all these years. The king nodded once. She has found him. Neither spoke another word. They both understood what that meant. The long years of waiting were over. Miles away, Rowan remained kneeling beside the wounded wolf. The glowing silver mark upon her wrist slowly faded until only a delicate crescent remained against her skin. She touched it gently. The warmth still lingered beneath her fingertips. "What are you?" she whispered. The wounded wolf slowly lifted himself onto unsteady legs. The 6 others gathered around him immediately, brushing against his shoulders with quiet affection. Their movements felt almost human. Not because they behaved like people, but because they cared for one another with unmistakable devotion. The injured wolf leaned briefly against the largest among them. Together they stood beneath falling snow while Rowan finished packing away her herbs. She expected the wolves to leave. Instead, every one of them turned toward her. The largest stepped forward. He lowered his head once, then began walking deeper into the northern wilderness. Again, he looked back, waiting. Rowan frowned. "You want me to come?" The wolf blinked slowly. That was all. Yet somehow, it felt like an answer. She looked behind her. The path leading home had almost vanished beneath fresh snow. For the first time in her life, returning seemed more uncertain than continuing. Taking a steady breath, she adjusted her satchel and followed once more. By evening the forest had changed. The towering pines grew farther apart, giving way to enormous ancient oaks whose twisted branches reached toward the pale sky like weathered hands. The snow became thinner here. Moss-covered great stones resting beside narrow streams that never seemed to freeze. The air carried the scent of cedar mixed with something sweeter. Wild jasmine. Though Rowan had never seen flowers bloom in this part of the kingdom. Strange blue lights floated quietly between the trees. They drifted like tiny stars caught beneath the branches before fading into nothing whenever she tried to look directly at them. The wolves ignored them, as though they had always belonged there. The farther they traveled, the quieter Rowan became. She no longer questioned the impossible. Wonder had slowly replaced disbelief. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the kingdom, another man received the news. Lord Malrek stood upon the walls of Blackstone Keep, watching snow sweep across the valley below. Unlike the royal castle, his fortress carried no warmth. Dark stone towers pierced the grey sky. Iron banners snapped sharply in the wind. Even the ravens circling above seemed reluctant to land. A soldier hurried toward him. "My lord." Malrek never looked away from the valley. "What is it?" "The royal bells. I heard them. The capital believes the Alpha King has awakened." A faint smile touched Malrek's lips. Not one of joy. One of satisfaction. "So," he murmured. "The old wolf finally leaves his den." The soldier hesitated. "There are other rumors." Malrek turned. His eyes were cold enough to match the winter around him. "What rumors?" "They say, the guardian mark has appeared." Silence. The wind blew harder. For several long moments Malrek simply stared. Then, he laughed. Low. Controlled. Dangerous. "I've searched half my life for that mark." He descended the stone steps without another word. Inside the fortress, hidden beneath heavy iron doors, lay a chamber filled with maps, forgotten scrolls, broken relics, and ancient wolf carvings stolen from ruined temples across the kingdom. Malrek lit another candle. Its warm glow revealed one particular drawing scratched onto faded parchment. A young child. 7 wolves. A silver crescent upon the wrist. Exactly like Rowan's. His fingers rested upon the drawing. "So," he whispered, "I've finally found you." The following morning dawned bright and painfully cold. Sunlight spilled across untouched snow, making every field sparkle like crushed crystal. Rowan and the wolves reached the edge of a forgotten valley. She stopped without realizing it. Before her stood enormous stone pillars rising from the earth in 2 perfect lines. Every pillar carried carvings of wolves running beneath the moon. Time had softened their edges, but not their beauty. Vines curled around them like living ribbons. Tiny white flowers somehow bloomed despite the winter cold. The wolves passed between the pillars without hesitation. Rowan followed. The moment she stepped inside, the forest changed. The wind disappeared. The cold faded. Birdsong returned. Warm sunlight poured through branches that moments before had blocked the sky. It felt less like entering another place, and more like stepping into another age. Ancient stone paths wound gently between crystal streams. Butterflies drifted lazily through patches of wildflowers. Great white wolves rested peacefully beside the water, lifting their heads only long enough to watch Rowan pass. None showed fear. None showed aggression. They simply watched, as though they had been expecting her. She slowly turned in every direction. This place, her voice barely escaped her lips, has been hidden. The largest wolf continued forward. Ahead stood a weathered monument carved from white stone. Its surface had cracked with age, yet one image remained perfectly clear. A woman holding an infant. 7 wolves surrounding them. Behind them stood a tall crowned figure. His face had worn away over centuries. Only his crown remained. Rowan reached toward the carving. The silver mark on her wrist suddenly became warm. Not painfully. Gently. The same crescent symbol upon the monument began glowing beneath her fingertips. Stone dust drifted softly onto the ground. A narrow doorway hidden within the monument slowly opened. Cold air breathed from the darkness beyond. The wolves stopped. None entered. Instead, every one of them lowered its head. Waiting. Inviting. Trusting. Rowan's pulse quickened. The darkness beyond the doorway seemed endless. Yet beneath the fear, another feeling stirred. Recognition. As though some forgotten corner of her heart had been waiting her entire life to cross this threshold. She lifted the lantern from her satchel and stepped toward the ancient passage. Behind her, 7 white wolves remained perfectly still beneath the winter sun. Watching. Guarding. Waiting. And somewhere far away, an army had already begun marching toward the hidden valley. The hidden doorway closed without a sound. Stone slid gently into place behind Rowan, sealing away the daylight until only the warm glow of her lantern remained. Its golden light danced across walls carved from smooth white rock, revealing thousands of tiny markings that time had never erased. Wolves ran beneath moons of every shape. Great trees reached toward stars that no longer existed in the night sky. Men and women stood beside them, not with weapons raised, but with open hands. The deeper she walked, the warmer the air became. Water dripped softly from the ceiling into shallow pools so clear they reflected the lantern like scattered pieces of the moon. The silence inside the passage did not feel empty. It felt patient, as though these halls had been waiting through countless winters for someone to return. Her footsteps echoed ahead. Each step seemed to awaken another memory hidden inside the stone itself. At last, the narrow tunnel opened into a vast chamber. Rowan stopped breathing. The cavern stretched so far overhead that its ceiling disappeared into darkness. Thick roots from ancient trees pierced through cracks in the rock, hanging like curtains woven by nature. Crystal formations glimmered from every wall, catching the lantern's light until the entire chamber shimmered like a sky filled with frozen stars. At its center flowed a quiet spring. The water emerged from the mountain itself before disappearing beneath smooth white stones. 7 wolves rested peacefully around its edge. Much larger than those who had guided Rowan. Their coats had faded with age until they looked almost silver beneath the crystal light. Their eyes remained closed. For one impossible moment, Rowan believed they were sleeping. Then she realized they were carved from stone. Guardians. Ancient as the mountain. Her lantern trembled slightly in her hand. This place, she whispered, is older than the kingdom. A calm voice answered from the darkness. Much older. Rowan spun around. A tall man stepped slowly into the light. He wore no golden crown. No jeweled armor. Only a dark cloak lined with white wolf fur that rested over simple black clothing crafted with quiet elegance. Silver threads embroidered along the edges caught the light each time he moved. His long silver hair rested against his shoulders. A weathered scar crossed his cheek. Golden eyes met hers with a sadness so deep it seemed carved into his soul. The wolves behind Rowan immediately lowered their heads. Not in fear. In respect. She understood before he spoke. The Alpha King. For years she had imagined a fierce ruler surrounded by soldiers and endless power. Instead she found a man whose shoulders carried the weight of countless winters. Neither of them spoke. The spring murmured softly between them. Finally, Rowan found her voice. "You knew I would come." The king nodded. "I have known since the night you were born." The words settled over the chamber like falling snow. Rowan stared at him. "I don't understand." "No." His expression softened. "You were never meant to." He walked slowly toward the spring. The wolves made room without command. Kneeling beside the water, he touched its surface with his fingertips. Gentle ripples spread across the crystal pool. The reflection changed. The water no longer showed the cavern. Instead, it revealed another winter. Another night. Many years ago. Rowan stepped closer. The image sharpened. A young woman wrapped tightly in a heavy cloak ran through a blizzard carrying a tiny bundle against her chest. A man walked beside her, sword drawn, constantly looking behind them. His armor bore the royal wolf crest. His face was tired. Determined. Behind them, flames climbed into the night sky. A distant village burned. Horsemen thundered through the snow. "They were your parents," the Alpha King said quietly. Rowan could not answer. She watched the woman tighten her arms around the bundle. A baby's tiny hand reached from the blanket. Her own. "They served the crown long before you were born," the king continued. "Not as nobles. Not as warriors seeking glory. They were guardians." The riders gained ground. The man turned. He drew his sword. The woman hesitated. Tears shone on her face. "Go," he shouted. Though the vision carried no sound, Rowan somehow heard the word inside her heart. The woman ran. The man remained. The riders surrounded him. The spring rippled. The image shifted. Now the woman stumbled into the very forest where Rowan had lived all her life. Snow reached her knees. Her strength was fading. Waiting among the trees stood 7 white wolves. Not threatening. Watching. The woman slowly knelt before them. She kissed the baby's forehead. Then placed the child gently upon a bed of evergreen branches. One by one, the wolves stepped forward. The largest lowered his great head until it touched the infant. The frightened mother closed her eyes. She whispered one final prayer. Then she turned back toward the men pursuing her. She never looked back. The image disappeared. Only quiet water remained. Rowan's throat tightened until speaking became almost impossible. "They." Her voice broke. "They left me." The Alpha King shook his head. "No." He looked toward the spring. "They saved you." Silence settled once more. At last he continued. "Your father gave his life delaying the men who hunted your family." The king's voice remained calm, but sorrow hid beneath every word. "Your mother led those same hunters away from you." He looked into Rowan's eyes. "They never abandoned you. They chose your life instead of their own." A tear slipped silently down Rowan's cheek. She wiped it away before another could follow. The king pretended not to notice. Some grief deserved privacy, even when shared. After several long moments, Rowan finally asked the question that had lived inside her since childhood. "Why me?" The king drew a slow breath. "Because your family protected something that should never have been found." He walked toward one of the ancient stone wolves surrounding the spring. Its enormous paws rested upon a circular seal carved into the floor. Deep cracks spread across the carving. Something beneath it pulsed faintly. Not with light. With darkness. "The man who hunted your parents was Lord Varric." Rowan frowned. "Malrek's father." "Yes." The king's eyes hardened. He believed an ancient power slept beneath these mountains. He was right. The king rested one hand upon the cracked seal. Long before kingdoms existed, Before castles rose across these valleys, there was a force born from fear itself. It could enter the hearts of men. It promised power. It fed upon hatred. The first guardians sealed it beneath this mountain. His fingers tightened slightly. Your parents died making certain it remained imprisoned. Rowan looked toward the faint black lines spreading across the ancient stone. So, it's still here. It sleeps. The king's voice became quiet. But seals weaken. And there are always those who believe they can control what was never meant to obey. Outside the cavern, a distant rumble echoed through the mountain. The wolves immediately lifted their heads. The Alpha King turned toward the entrance. His expression changed. Not fear. Preparation. They've found us. Far beyond the sacred valley, dark banners moved through the snow like a spreading stain. Hundreds of soldiers climbed narrow mountain paths carrying iron shields and burning torches. Their armor reflected little sunlight. Their faces remained hidden beneath heavy helmets. At their head rode Lord Malrek. His black horse climbed steadily over frozen ground while cold wind pulled at the crimson cloak resting across his shoulders. He studied the mountains with hungry eyes. At last, the hidden sanctuary lay before him. He smiled. So this is where you've hidden. One of his captains rode beside him. My lord, the men are uneasy. They speak of spirits. They've seen white wolves watching from the cliffs. Malrek never looked away. Let them watch. His smile deepened. They'll soon have a new master. The captain hesitated. Our scouts never returned. I know. Should we wait for reinforcements? Malrek's answer came without hesitation. No. His gaze settled upon the highest peak where ancient stone pillars barely rose above the trees. The Alpha King has protected that place for too long. He slowly unsheathed his sword. The blade shimmered with the same strange black metal Rowan had seen piercing the wounded wolf. Green poison glistened along its edge. Tonight, he whispered, the last guardian falls. Back inside the sanctuary, Rowan followed the Alpha King through winding stone passages that climbed steadily toward daylight. As they emerged from the mountain, the hidden valley spread before her in breathtaking silence. Waterfalls poured from towering cliffs into crystal pools below. Wildflowers painted the meadows despite the lingering snow beyond the valley walls. Dozens of white wolves rested peacefully beneath ancient cedar trees while children no older than 10 laughed as they carried baskets of herbs between stone cottages hidden among the hills. Elderly men carved wooden figures beneath shaded porches. Women hung fresh bread outside open windows to cool in the mountain breeze. The air smelled of pine, warm bread, and blooming flowers. It was not merely a sanctuary. It was a forgotten home. A place the outside world believed had vanished centuries ago. The people noticed Rowan. Their conversations faded. One by one. They bowed. Not to a queen. Not to a ruler. But to someone they had waited a lifetime to meet. Confusion filled Rowan's face. The Alpha King spoke quietly beside her. They have guarded your future almost as faithfully as my wolves. She looked at the peaceful faces surrounding her. Strangers. Yet somehow, none of them felt unfamiliar. Before she could ask another question, a horn echoed across the valley. Once, twice, 3 times. The joyful sounds disappeared instantly. Children were hurried indoors. Doors closed. Archers climbed ancient stone walls hidden among the cliffs. The wolves rose together as one. The mountain itself seemed to awaken. A scout came running through the meadow, breathing hard, snow clinging to his boots. He dropped to one knee before the Alpha King. My king. His voice shook. Lord Malrek has crossed the outer pass. He struggled for another breath. He brings the entire Blackstone Legion. The Alpha King looked toward the distant mountains where columns of dark smoke now climbed into the winter sky. Then he rested one steady hand upon the hilt of the ancient sword waiting at his side. The years of peace had finally come to an end. The first snow began to fall again before the enemy reached the valley. It drifted gently from a sky the color of weathered steel, settling upon cedar branches, stone walls, and the broad backs of the white wolves waiting along the mountain paths. For one fragile moment, the valley looked untouched, peaceful, as though war had lost its way. Then the distant sound of iron shattered the silence. The steady rhythm of hundreds of marching boots echoed through the cliffs. Metal struck against metal. Orders were shouted. Horses snorted clouds of white breath into the freezing air. The peace that had hidden within the valley for generations slowly stepped aside. The Alpha King stood upon the highest stone terrace overlooking the narrow pass. His silver cloak stirred quietly behind him. He watched the dark line of soldiers climbing toward the sanctuary without anger or fear. Only sorrow. Beside him, Rowan followed the movement below. She had never seen an army before. The endless rows of shields looked like a river of black stone flowing through the snow. "What will happen?" she asked softly. The king did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched a flock of white birds rise from the forest before finally saying, "They have already chosen war." His voice remained calm. "Our choice is only how we answer it." Below them, every able guardian prepared without panic. Archers carried bundles of arrows to hidden platforms carved into the cliffs. Old women filled baskets with healing herbs. Young boys carried buckets of fresh water from the spring. Even the smallest task mattered. No one wasted a single movement. Rowan noticed something that surprised her. No one spoke of revenge. No one celebrated the coming battle. Every face carried the same quiet determination. They were not preparing to conquer. They were preparing to protect. The difference settled deeply inside her heart. Far below, Lord Malrek finally reached the entrance of the hidden valley. His horse slowed beneath the towering stone pillars carved with wolves. He looked upward, smiling as though he admired a prize already won. "So," he murmured, "it truly exists." His captains gathered around him. None of them looked comfortable. The forest surrounding the valley had become strangely silent. No birds called from the branches. No deer crossed the snow. It felt as though the mountain itself watched them. One captain cleared his throat. "My lord, perhaps we should wait until daylight." Malrek glanced toward him. "And allow them another night to strengthen their defenses." The captain lowered his eyes. "No, my lord." Malrek raised one hand. The Blackstone Legion halted. Rows of soldiers lifted heavy shields while archers prepared flaming arrows. Behind them rolled enormous siege wagons built to break fortress gates. The commander smiled again. "They hide behind legends." He slowly drew his poisoned sword. "We hide behind steel." With one sharp motion, he pointed toward the valley. "Advance." The first arrows darkened the sky. They rose like a flock of black birds before falling toward the hidden sanctuary. But they never reached it. A deafening chorus of howls exploded across the mountains. From every ridge, every cliff, every shadow beneath the pines, white wolves appeared. Not 7, not 20, hundreds. They ran across impossible slopes, leaping effortlessly between rocks while snow exploded beneath their paws. The Blackstone soldiers froze. Many had heard stories. None had believed them. The wolves did not charge blindly. They moved with astonishing discipline. Some intercepted the horses. Others blocked narrow mountain paths. Several simply stood upon the cliffs, forcing the enemy to divide their attention. The Alpha King raised his hand. The hidden archers released their first volley. Arrows hissed through the freezing air. They struck the ground directly before the advancing soldiers. A warning, not an execution. The king had offered them one final chance to leave. Lord Malrek laughed. "So the old wolf still believes mercy wins wars." He lifted his sword. "Forward." The second wave advanced. This time the defenders had no choice. The battle began. The mountain echoed with the sounds of steel, cracking wood, pounding hooves, and desperate cries. Snow burst into the air beneath running wolves. Shields splintered against ancient stone. Torches tumbled into the drifts, sending clouds of steam upward before dying beneath the snow. Yet something became clear almost immediately. The wolves never attacked without reason. Whenever a frightened soldier dropped his weapon and fled, They allowed him to go. When horses panicked, wolves drove them away from danger instead of bringing them down. The Alpha King's command reached every guardian. Protect life whenever possible, even the lives of those who had come to destroy them. Rowan watched from behind the stone walls. Her hands trembled. Not from fear alone. She had spent her entire life healing wounds. Now she watched men creating them. One elderly healer touched her shoulder. "We need you." Without hesitation, Rowan hurried toward the shelters where the injured were being carried. She knelt beside a young guardian whose arm had been struck by an arrow. Blood soaked through his sleeve. He tried to stand. She gently pressed him back. "You'll fight again." Her fingers worked quickly, wrapping clean linen around the wound. "But only if you let it heal." Nearby, another healer called her name. A frightened child had fallen while carrying water. Rowan hurried again. Then another wounded man. Then another. Hours passed. She scarcely noticed. Outside, the battle raged. Inside, she fought a different war. One against pain. One life at a time. Suddenly, a scream echoed across the valley. Not human. Wolf. Rowan turned. Several guardians rushed toward the western gate. She followed. Her heart sank. A heavy iron cage had been dragged into the battlefield. Inside, 3 tiny white wolf pups huddled together. They pressed against one another, trembling as soldiers surrounded them with drawn spears. Lord Malrek stepped beside the cage. His smile never reached his eyes. The wolves upon the battlefield stopped moving. The silence returned. Even the wind seemed to disappear. Malrek looked toward the stone walls. "Rowan." His voice carried across the valley. "I know you're listening." She slowly stepped into view. The Alpha King immediately reached for her arm. "No." She looked at the frightened pups. Their small ears flattened. One whimpered softly. Malrek rested his poisoned sword against the iron bars. "One command." He smiled. "And they die." Every muscle in Rowan's body tightened. "What do you want?" "The Guardian Mark." He spread his arms as though asking for something simple. "Come willingly." "The wolves live. The valley survives." The Alpha King's voice cut through the silence. "He lies." "I know." Rowan answered quietly. "But if I do nothing?" She looked toward the cage. "They die." The king stepped closer. "You owe no one your life." Rowan smiled sadly. "My parents thought differently." The word struck him harder than any blade. He closed his eyes for only a heartbeat. When he opened them again, he understood. She had already made her choice. Without another word, Rowan walked toward Malrek. The wolves did not move. Neither did the guardians. Every step across the snowy valley felt impossibly loud. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Snow compressed beneath her boots while icy wind pulled gently at her cloak. She stopped only a few feet away from the cage. The pups looked up at her. One reached its tiny nose through the iron bars, brushing softly against her hand. Tears filled Rowan's eyes. She smiled anyway. "It'll be all right." Behind her, the Alpha King remained perfectly still. Every instinct urged him to stop her. Every promise he had made to protect her demanded action. Yet another truth held him in place. Protection given by force was no protection at all. Rowan had chosen freely. He would honor that choice. Malrek extended one gloved hand. "The mark." Rowan lifted her wrist. The silver crescent shimmered beneath the grey sky. The moment Malrek reached toward it, the smallest wolf pup cried out. A single, heartbreaking sound. Rowan looked into its frightened eyes. Something inside her heart broke open. Not with pain. With love. Not only for the wolves. For every frightened creature hiding from violence. For every child waiting behind stone walls. For every exhausted guardian. Even for the terrified soldiers who had been ordered into a battle they did not understand. Her eyes closed. "I don't belong to the mark," she whispered. "It belongs to all who choose compassion." The silver crescent blazed with light. So brilliant that everyone shielded their eyes. Warmth spread through the valley. Snowflakes stopped falling. The frozen earth beneath Rowan's feet glowed softly. Then, the mountain answered. Ancient roots burst upward through the snow, twisting harmlessly around siege engines before lifting them into the air as though they weighed nothing. Towering cedars bent without breaking, their branches forming living walls that shielded children and healers from flying arrows. Streams overflowed, carrying away burning oil before it reached the cottages. The wolves lifted their heads together. Not in fury. In recognition. Across the cliffs, bears emerged from winter dens. Golden eagles circled overhead. Red foxes appeared between the trees. Even frightened deer stepped from the forest without fear. The entire mountain had awakened. Not to wage war, but to defend the innocent. Every living creature shared one heartbeat. One purpose. Lord Malrek stared in disbelief. This is impossible. No, the Alpha King said as he drew the ancient sword at last. It is what your father feared. The light surrounding Rowan grew brighter still. And deep beneath the mountain, something ancient, something imprisoned for centuries, opened its eyes. The light pouring from Rowan's silver mark spread across the valley like the first sunrise after an endless winter. It washed over broken shields, blood-stained snow, frightened faces, and towering pines, touching everything with the same quiet warmth. For one suspended heartbeat, the battle simply stopped. Swords hung motionless in trembling hands. Bows remained undrawn. Even the horses lowered their heads, their anxious breaths becoming slow and calm. The mountain itself seemed to inhale. Then came the sound. Not a howl. Not thunder. A deep, ancient pulse rolled upward from beneath the earth. The ground trembled. Cracks raced across the frozen valley floor. The ancient seal beneath the hidden sanctuary had begun to fail. Far below the roots of the oldest mountains, darkness stirred. It had no face. No body. No true shape. It flowed like black smoke through forgotten stone corridors, slipping between cracks that had remained closed for centuries. Where it touched the walls, frost turned black. Ancient carvings crumbled into dust. The air itself grew heavy. The force that Rowan's parents had died protecting the world from was waking at last. Lord Malrek's smile returned. So, he whispered, I was right. He stepped toward the widening crack. Power shimmered inside the darkness. It whispered promises that no one else could hear. Strength, victory, immortality, everything he had spent his life chasing. He stretched out his hand. I command you. The darkness paused. Then it moved. Like ink spreading through clear water, it climbed his arm. Malrek laughed. I knew it. Black veins crept beneath his skin. His eyes glowed with cruel satisfaction. For a few glorious moments, he believed he had won. Then the whispers changed. They no longer praised him. They mocked him. His smile faded. No. The darkness continued climbing. It ignored his commands. Ignored his strength. Ignored his ambition. His laughter became a cry. I am your master. The mountain answered with silence. The ancient force had never waited for a master. Only a victim. The black mist burst outward. It swept across the battlefield like a winter storm, wrapping itself around soldiers consumed by hatred and greed. One by one they dropped their weapons, clutching their heads as terrifying visions swallowed them. Each saw something different. A throne turning to ash. A crown melting into darkness. Gold becoming dust. Victory slipping forever beyond reach. Men who had marched proudly into the valley fell to their knees, overwhelmed not by wounds, but by the weight of the hatred they had carried for years. The darkness fed upon it. It grew stronger. The Alpha King stepped forward. His ancient sword glowed with pale silver light. Wolves. The command echoed across the cliffs. Every white wolf answered with one united howl. The sound rolled through the valley, pushing against the spreading darkness. Light and shadow collided in the freezing air. Neither gave way. Rowan stood at the center of the glowing circle. The guardian mark burned brighter than ever before. Its warmth no longer rested only upon her wrist. It flowed through her heartbeat. Through every breath, she looked toward the Alpha King. The seal. His golden eyes met hers. It cannot be restored by strength. She understood before he spoke another word. It must be given willingly. He nodded, as it was the first time. She looked down at the silver mark. The bond. The king lowered his eyes. If the seal is restored. His voice grew almost too quiet to hear. The guardian mark will disappear. She waited. And the wolves? His silence answered first. Then. They will no longer belong to you. Rowan slowly turned. The 7 white wolves stood together only a few steps away. The wounded 7th wolf, now fully healed, walked toward her. He gently rested his head against her shoulder. The same way he had in the ruined temple. One after another, the remaining wolves came forward. None made a sound. None resisted what they somehow understood was coming. They simply stayed close. As family would. A tear slipped down Rowan's cheek. She buried trembling fingers in the thick white fur of the largest wolf. You guarded me. Her voice barely rose above the wind. Before I could even remember my own name. The wolf closed its eyes. You made sure I was never alone. Another tear followed. And now? She smiled through the sorrow. It's my turn to protect you. She stepped toward the broken seal. The darkness reached for her immediately. Cold spread through the valley. Flowers wilted. Streams slowed. The sky itself seemed to dim. The Alpha King tightened his grip upon his sword. Every instinct urged him to pull her back. But love was not possession. Love sometimes meant trusting another heart to choose its own path. So he remained where he stood. Watching. Believing. Rowan knelt beside the ancient stone. The silver mark pulsed gently beneath her skin. She placed her palm against the cracked seal. Closing her eyes, she remembered everything. Her mother's gentle smile in the vision. Her father's final stand. The robin she had healed. The frightened travelers. The children who had left flowers outside her gate. The wolves waiting through rain, snow, and endless winters without asking for thanks. Compassion. Not power. That had always been the true gift. I give freely, she whispered. The mark answered. Silver light poured from her hand into the mountain. The cracks stopped spreading. Then, very slowly, they began to close. The darkness shrieked. It rushed toward Rowan one final time. The Alpha King charged. His sword cut through the black mist, buying only a heartbeat. Yet that heartbeat was enough. The light reached the center of the ancient prison. The seal closed. Stone fused together. The mountain fell silent. A blinding flash swept across the valley. When the light finally faded, the darkness was gone. Lord Malrek lay alone upon the snow. The poison had vanished from his sword. The black veins beneath his skin were gone. His armor looked strangely ordinary. He stared toward the gray sky with empty eyes. Everything he had sacrificed for power had disappeared in a single moment. His soldiers slowly lowered their weapons. Many began weeping quietly. Others simply sat in the snow, too exhausted to understand they were alive. No one cheered. The victory had cost too much for celebration. The Alpha King approached Malrek. The defeated commander struggled to speak. I failed. You chose hatred, the king replied calmly. It always ends the same way. Malrek closed his eyes. The wind covered his footprints with fresh snow. By morning, even the mountain seemed unwilling to remember the path he had taken. Justice had come. Not through revenge, but through the consequences of his own choices. Rowan looked down at her wrist. The silver crescent had faded. Only smooth skin remained. The warmth she had carried since touching the wounded wolf slowly drifted away like the last rays of sunset. The 7 wolves felt it too. One by one they approached her. The largest stood before her for a long moment. Neither moved. Neither needed words. Finally, the great wolf lowered himself until his head rested against her chest. She wrapped both arms around his thick neck. The world disappeared. There was only warm fur, quiet breathing, and 20 years of silent love shared in one final embrace. When he stepped back, the other 6 followed. Each touched her gently. A shoulder, a hand, a forehead, a farewell older than language itself. Then they turned toward the forest. The Alpha King watched them go. They are free. Rowan nodded, though her heart ached. They always should have been. The wolves climbed the hillside together. At the edge of the pines they stopped. All 7 looked back one final time. Morning sunlight spilled across their white coats until they seemed almost made of light itself. Then they disappeared among the ancient trees. This time, they did not return at sunset. The seasons slowly changed. Winter released its grip upon the mountains. Streams laughed again beneath melting ice. Wildflowers covered the valleys where soldiers had once marched. The hidden sanctuary opened its gates for the first time in generations. Its people stepped into the wider kingdom without fear. Villagers who had once whispered frightened stories about the wolves now traveled to the valley carrying seeds, tools, books, and gifts. Children laughed together regardless of where they had been born. Old wounds healed slowly, but they healed. The Alpha King kept his promise. The forgotten forests became protected lands where no hunter killed for pride alone. Travelers walked the woodland paths with respect rather than fear. The bond between people and wolves was rebuilt not through magic, but through trust. It took years. The strongest things always did. Rowan returned to the little stone cottage at the edge of the forest. Its ivy-covered walls looked exactly as she remembered. The herb bundles still swayed gently from the ceiling. The robin's old nest remained beneath the apple tree. Life quietly continued. Only now, she was no longer alone. Children visited to learn the names of healing plants. Travelers rested by her fireplace before continuing their journeys. Injured animals still found their way to her garden as though kindness itself had become a path they could follow. The cottage that people had once feared slowly became the warmest home in the Northern Kingdom. Stories changed. Grandparents no longer frightened children with tales of cursed wolves. Instead, they spoke of 7 loyal guardians who had protected hope through the darkest years. They spoke of an Alpha King who ruled with mercy instead of fear. Most of all, they spoke of a young woman who had saved a kingdom not because she was the strongest, but because she refused to let compassion leave her heart. Many years later, on a peaceful autumn evening, Rowan stepped outside just as the sun slipped behind the ancient pines. Golden leaves drifted lazily across the meadow. The air smelled of cedar, fresh bread, and wood smoke. She smiled at the familiar silence settling over the forest. It reminded her of another life. Another beginning. A soft rustle came from the trees. At the edge of the shadows stood a single white wolf. Older now. A few strands of silver touched the fur around his muzzle. His golden eyes were gentle. Wise. He did not step into the garden. He simply watched. Just as he always had. Rowan smiled. No words were needed. She placed one hand over her heart. The old wolf lowered his head. Then, with slow and graceful steps, he disappeared into the moonlit forest. She remained there long after darkness covered the hills. Not because she was waiting for him to return, but because she finally understood the greatest truth the wolves had ever taught her. Real loyalty does not ask for reward. Real love does not demand to be seen. Like the quiet forest beneath the stars, it stands watch through every storm, every season, and every sorrow, until the world is gentle enough to bloom again.